Welcome to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. I'm Christine Grimmett, and I'm again joined by our international program specialist, Ellen Foell, for another one of our World Perspectives episodes as we learn more about different cultures and understand how each worldview impacts decisions on life and abortion. Before I turn things over to Ellen and have her introduce our guest, let me mention an opportunity for listeners who work in pregnancy help ministries to join us for Heartbeat International's annual conference in April in Kentucky. Now, we're again hosting in person and online. That's two conferences happening simultaneously. As you can imagine, this is an opportunity for lots of training from workshops by experts in the pregnancy help movement. We'll have people joining us from around the world for keynote sessions, in-depth training sessions, workshops, and so much more. Learn more and register at heartbeatservices.org.
Well, hello, Heartbeat friends. This is Ellen Foell, Heartbeat's International Program Specialist. I get to oversee relationships with our international affiliates and serve them on behalf of Heartbeat. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce an interview and your pleasure to hear from Svetlana Jovanova, who is the founder and director of Lydia, A Beating Heart, which is the only pregnancy help center in Macedonia. Now, Svetlana, just for people who are not as geopolitically astute as you are, can you tell us where Macedonia even is?
Well, except that you can find it in the Bible, in the Acts.
Oh, right.
Macedonia is located in the southeastern part of Europe. It's a landlocked country, neighboring Greece in the south, Albania in the west, Serbia and Kosovo in the north, and Bulgaria in east.
Oh, and so you are also describing a part of the world that is known as the Balkans, correct?
Yes.
And what are the other countries in the Balkans, just so we can educate everyone on their geography today?
Well, Greece, portion of Turkey, up to the European part of Istanbul, partially Romania, Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia, Croatia, and Slovenia.
Okay.
Including Macedonia, Kosovo, Serbia, and Albania and Greece.
Okay. And Svetlana, you are also a leader of the Balkan Network. And tell us a little bit about the Balkan Network before we get into the rest of this interview.
The idea for the Balkan Network came several years ago, and we are so close to register it officially. We are still unofficial network of all the pregnancy care centers in the Balkans. I mean, in former Yugoslavia. So for a while, we were calling ourselves XU for Life, but we are expanding now, getting under the same umbrella the other Balkan countries like Albania, Greece, and Romania.
That's terrific. That's great. Okay, so I want to thank you for your willingness to participate in our series of podcasts. And as I was putting this series together in my head, I had just been with you in Bosnia. That was in June. And then I was with you in Romania. And then again in Macedonia. But my point is that in the course of those several engagements with you and with other people in Eastern Europe, I was beginning to realize that perhaps part of our worldview perspective had to include a podcast on the impact of communism. And communism had its strongest impact really for, 70 years, a long time. Tell us a little bit, just for background's sake, about communism in the XU countries.
Well, the communism started somewhere in the late 20s, early 30s of the 20th century, mostly as a partisan movement in Europe, and then with the forming of the Communist Party all around the globe. and especially with the Second World War. Basically, all the partisans were that were fighting against Yugoslavia was mostly under the German and Italian occupation. So they would be forming groups that later on will join the Communist Party. The leader of that group was Josip Broz Tito, who later on, after the end of the Second World War, he became the president of the Social Federative Republic of Yugoslavia. And then that was a joint federation of several countries, including Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia, and Macedonia, and with two independent areas, Kosovo and Vojvodina. So Tito was, he was a communist leader, but he was different than the rest of the communist leaders in Europe and, even from China and Cuba. I think he was very, very moderate. I mean, still, he would deal with his opponents, people who wouldn't think like him, who wouldn't agree with his politics. But still, he was investing a lot in the country. I mean, Yugoslavia, as a communist federation, didn't even want to be part of NATO or the other communist countries. So he started a pact called who are not attached, like countries who are not attached to any other of those called like mission pacts that were forming. So he was a wise guy. I mean, if you ask some of the older generation in former Yugoslavia, people would tell you like it was much, much better to live in Yugoslavia when Tito was alive than to live now in the capitalism, because he would invest even in rural areas, he would invest in bigger cities, he would invest in factories. People were having just enough money, they could have traveled easily somewhere. And even like the Yugoslavian passport was like one of the strongest 5 passports in the world. Mm-hmm. So you can travel everywhere without any problem. So when communism started falling apart, you can just imagine the shock that people got.
Now, Svetlana, for those who don't know you, you are much too young to have literally grown up under communism. But I know as well that you did have some of the impact of communism. And in fact, you also, you are old enough to remember the war that took place in Bosnia in 35 years ago, after the Yugoslavia fell apart, disbanded. But what I want to ask you about is, in spite of the fact that Tito had some financial parts of his regime that weren't that terrible, let me ask you, for communists, what is the prime reality in the communist worldview? So in Christianity, the primary reality is God, who God is and how he relates to us. In communism, what is the prime reality?
To live in the present and to live for yourself, but at the same time sharing with the others.
Wow.
So in former Yugoslavia, there is a highway that starts in Slovenia and ends in Macedonia. The name of the highway, it was Brotherhood and Unity. Mm. And it was built by by the youth of Yugoslavia that would go, and youth from Macedonia would go to build a road in Croatia and vice versa. And that's why there were so many during like 60s, 70s, and even part of the 80s. There were so many mixed marriages between nationalities in Yugoslavia, because they will meet each other, become couples during those they called like work actions. Mm-hmm. that were happening. But at the same time, like they were even divided like in like wealth groups, the rich, the middle class, and the very, very poor. Although like you could see what was the middle class, but still people wanted to share. Still people had just enough. And they wanted to take care of themselves, of their family, which it wasn't a large family. That was another thing that was during the communism. 1 or 2 children would be enough, especially in the larger cities. That wasn't the case in the villages, in rural areas, where they would have multiple children because they would need work hands eventually. But in the larger cities, that was something that was even emphasized, that like 1 or 2 children is enough.
Well, let me stop you for just a minute, which I do frequently in our conversations. So we know that China, which is a country still living under communism, had a one-child policy, and now they have a slightly modified one-child policy. Was there an actual policy against more than 2 children, or limiting families in the size? Let's just talk about Yugoslavia.
There wasn't an actual policy, but it was encouraged.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So I guess my question then is, it's kind of like, well, we encourage people to have 1 car or 2 cars. We encourage people to have 2 children, or maybe 1. How is a human being? It's not like a human being is a commodity. So what is the view in communism of a human being?
Well, the human being was it wasn't alive before the birth.
Mm.
So the person would have a value, after it's been born.
Mm.
And especially if it's a boy. In some of the countries, former Yugoslavian countries, the gender selection was so big that even if it was, it wasn't, 1 or 2 children, still like they would do gender selection. And if it's not a boy, it wouldn't see the light of the day.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Or like, especially in rural areas, the woman would have as many children till she gets a boy, and then they will stop. So they can be 10, 15 girls in the family, and she will continue to give birth till an heir to the family is born.
So this is related, but a little tangential. So what is the view under communism of women?
Well, see, I think there were kind of like 2 different views for women. Even during the Second World War, there were so many women who were revolutionaries, freedom fighters. We've learned in history about them, but almost all of them were single women. So they are not married. They wouldn't have any children. They wouldn't, even later on in life, they wouldn't marry. So as an individual, yes, she was capable to do many changes. But at the same time, when the governments were formed, there will be even less than 0.01% of women included in the leadership of the country or in the institutions. So the woman was like seen as a housewife, as someone who gives birth to children, and that's it. Not exactly as an equal to the men, unless she proves herself in the Communist Party. In that case, yes, she can be. Even in those cases, for those women, it was very hard to reach a certain level of leadership. But for other women, basically housewives. The only good thing I think was women were allowed to be educated. So they would go to schools, they would go to universities if their fathers will allow. Which in some cases that, the fathers wouldn't allow for the women to go to school to get the higher education than high school, which was mandatory. So anything after high school, they had to be either really, really smart or the father to be very, not conservative, but very proactive in, so to allow them to go to university. And I'm speaking this from my mom's experience. She was one of those cases where, my grandfather, high school was enough. So when she wanted to go, even for high school was a problem. And when it was time to go to university, my mom was telling me that like many people would come to beg my grandfather to let her go to study because she was smart. But for him, like, no, she needs to stay home and help around the house and eventually get married. And that's it. So that was the case for many, many women during communism.
So we know that communism is not a faith. It's not a religion. It is a worldview. And it's actually an economic worldview that has implications, obviously, in the culture, and it has implications in every other way, sociologically, politically. So I asked you before, what is a human being? I think I asked you that in communism. Let me ask you differently that same question. What is the value under communism of a human being?
I wouldn't say that there wasn't even any value. Huh. People were seen as someone who would work in factories. Producers, yes. Someone who would work on the fields. Someone who would pay taxes and all that. So they weren't seen as potential life changers.
So this comes to the nub of our question, of the reason for the podcast, which is, so how does that, let's say, speaking from your mom's generation, how does that value of life being basically consumer oriented or production oriented, utilitarian, how does that impact the view on life, the view on abortion? Yeah, that's my question.
People are expendable. So if you cannot work in the factory, always there'll be someone else who will come on your place. People would disappear during night. There is an island called Goli Otok, and literally means kind of like the dead island. Well, the naked island, because there is no vegetation, only rocks. But it was the most infamous prison in the entire Yugoslavia for political prisoners. And if someone ends up there, it's most likely that he won't come back home. And families wouldn't even know what happened to the father, the grandfather, the son, because they will disappear without any trace. Abortion became legal in 1972, but it was performed long before that, illegally.
Yep.
And according to some statistics, now it will be women over, let's say, 50 or 55. According to some statistics, every other woman over the age of 50 or 55 would have at least one abortion in her lifetime. And during our work, we've met a woman who had 22 abortions. And she is now in her probably 60s. So she was born and raised during communism. She gave birth to her 2 children during the communism. And she had the rest of the 22 aborted during the communism. Because that's what people were telling, Still, it was a family secret, but women were doing it. And it was encouraged by the family.
Why would it be encouraged by the family?
Because 1 or 2 children is enough. And if you want to live a comfortable life, then why do you need more?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if it's a boy and a girl. You have the perfect pair.
Right.
So you don't need more than that. You will have an heir to the household, to continue the legacy, to continue the family name.
So tell me how, right now, what I'm interested in is, how do you reach that woman who is 62? I mean, you and I were just at a conference, and we met women who had multiple abortions, and as you say, double digits. How do those women come to you, and how do you help them? And do they want help?
See, you have kind of like 2 types of women. Women who think that they didn't do anything wrong, and women who regret every single abortion that they had, even if it was just one.
Mm-hmm.
But for the others, it's like, because as I said, it was a family secret. Like after it was done, no one would talk about it. So the women would learn how not to feel, how, even if they would start feeling sad, depression, it wasn't something that it was common. I mean, women were depressed, but it wasn't called depression. It was like, oh, she's not feeling well. She will get better tomorrow. But they learned how not to feel,
mm-hmm.
how to be robots without any feelings. And growing up and even talking with many people from my generation, expressing love, it wasn't something that was common in the family. To tell your child that you love him or love her, it wasn't something that it was done during communism. Emotions weren't validated. Feelings, it was for weak people.
So does that have impact on the generation now in the way that they look at abortion, the way that they look at the value of a baby they might be carrying in utero? Does that lack of emotion and that the generations of family secrecy, does that impact the way that, does it impact the women who come to you, and how does it impact the way that you counsel those women?
Of course, it impacts them. I mean, we've had women who say, oh, my mom had an abortion. She was okay. My grandmother had an abortion. She was okay. Really? Was she okay? Were they okay? They didn't talk about it. They wouldn't talk about it. They would just say, oh, yeah, you can have an abortion. There's no big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But that was it. And now, and it's kind of like even generational curse. If you go back, you will see that almost every single woman in that family had an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes with generations. It would go from the grandmother to the mother, to the daughter, maybe even to the granddaughter, till someone say, it's enough, I'm breaking the cycle. And for these women, it was interesting, like during COVID, when we were locked down, we've had many women who had abortions in the past that would call, because now it was the time when the feelings started to appear again. Because for so long, they weren't allowing themselves to feel anything. They will just submit the feelings or the thoughts. But when we were in lockdown, and social distance, there's nothing else that you can do except for reflect on the past and think, what have I done? Especially for women, there were so many, and still there are so many Macedonians living in the country. In some smaller cities, only the older generation is left.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just imagine the thoughts those women were having, like, only if I didn't abort that child, maybe that child would have been now with me.
Mm.
Or only if I didn't abort that child now wouldn't be here to help me.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of being somewhere in Europe or
Mm-hmm.
in the States and forgetting that his mom is right here waiting. So those emotions were now out in the open. And I think our oldest client was an 86-year-old woman who had an abortion, and according to her age, probably it was illegal abortion when she had it. She regretted it. She needed forgiveness. She needed redemption. She needed someone to tell her that she's allowed to grieve the lost child. Because those women, it's not just they don't allow themselves to feel, they don't allow themselves to grieve because they did it intentionally.
That is pretty powerful. Tell me, can you tell me what happened with this the 86-year-old woman who found her? Did she find her way to Lydia?
Yes, actually she did. She did. She was from Stip.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where is she now. This was several years ago. But someone told her that it's okay to grieve
Mm-hmm.
that child, and that there is forgiveness, that God forgives her, and now it's time for her to forgive herself.
Mm-hmm. No.
And I think that was the hardest part for her, to forgive herself. And for many women, even Christian women, that mindset, God can forgive any sin that I've committed in my life, except the abortion that I had. And I've heard that so many times in the past 10 years from so many women who are devoted Christians, that they cannot be sure if God can forgive them the abortion that they had in their past. Mm-hmm. And for us, it's not like just to help them grieve, but at the same time is to be able to open their hearts to God. That small room in their hearts, they keep it closed, locked for so long, to be open and to let the light to come in and to experience the full forgiveness that they have in God. Because for so long they were taught, they cannot do anything right. Mm. That, okay, you already have 2 children. That's enough. You don't need more. You are not allowed to grieve. You're not allowed to feel. You're allowed to go to work from 7 till 3, go back home, take care of your family. The next day, the same, and the next day, and the next day, till the end of the life.
So this is really a very bleak society, frankly, that you paint. Very bleak. Let me ask you, just in closing, communism has now not been the rule of the land for 35 years. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, the Yugoslavia started to fall apart in 1990.
Okay. And I'm not a math person, but that's what, 33 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. 33 years of communism. But like any worldview, it seeps generationally into the next generation. And so how do you see the effects of communism still permeating into the psyche and the minds of the women that you serve in Macedonia?
It will take several generations till that mindset is changed. because we still have living people who grew up in Yugoslavia, who were born in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, and they still keep the same mindset or very close to as it was. So it will take several generations for that to be gone. It's, I think one of the benefits from the communism, the socialism, was it was family oriented. It was a family oriented society. It was like the father is the head of the house, the mother is the father is the provider, the mother is the protector and the keeper of the family, and for everything else. And I'm happy that we still have that kind of mindset, family oriented. We need to be close to our family. But at the same time, as it was good, it was even bad, women weren't allowed to decide for themselves, men would decide for instead of them. And it would take a lot of courage for many women to change that. As I said, like for my mom to go to university to study, or I was told, my grandfather, when I told my grandfather that I will go to university, I will move to a different city, to a bigger city, that I will move to Skopje. My grandfather told me, like, why? You should stay here, get a job, and get married. And I'm like, no. And I'm the only girl in my family.
Mm-hmm.
There are 3 other boys in my family. So I'm the only girl and the oldest. So for me to go against my grandfather, it was like, no. He was still the head of the family.
Mm-hmm.
Although my father and my uncle, both of them were married with their own families. Still, it was my grandfather who would call the shots sometimes. So for me to say, sorry, Grandpa, I'm moving, I'm going to university, and I'm moving to a different city. So sometimes, it's hard for people to break that cycle and to say no to that mindset. But I think being now living in a different society, we went through transition for 10, 15 years as a country, where after Yugoslavia fell apart, people were without jobs, people were losing their homes, they would, begging for food, waiting in lines to buy milk and bread and flour, So just living even those 15 years after the communism fell apart, it changed many of people. And now they see, okay, maybe communism was good because everything was provided for the families, but it was like a big balloon that just popped up and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing was left.
All right, here's a $64,000 question. With inflation, let's make it $79,000. What do you see as the unique role that Lydia has in transforming a culture where life is valued only for what it can produce or consume, and where the human being's value is essentially from a utilitarian viewpoint? What is the unique role that not just any pregnancy help center, but Lydia in Macedonia has to combat the impact of 2.5 generations of communism?
there were, and I'm sure there will be many more, women who realized it's okay to have a third child. It's okay to have even a fourth child, or fifth and sixth if it's in case of twins.
Yeah.
But for when there's like, but what the neighbors will say, what my family will say, what the relatives will say if I have, especially if they're over 35 or close to 40, it's okay to have another child, even if you're 40, even if your oldest child is 20. We've had several situations like that when a woman in her early 40s would find herself pregnant and her oldest child is already in college. And just to tell her, it's okay. You can still be his mom, and you can still be the mom of this life that is growing inside of you. Just to open their eyes to see, like, yes, I can do this, and it's not shameful, and it's not embarrassing, and I don't care what the others will say. And at the same time, to tell even to that 86-year-old woman that it's okay to grieve the abortion that she had. And she will be forgiven. It's okay to tell women it's okay to feel. It's okay to experience emotions. It's okay to stand up against your husband who is pressuring you to have an abortion, and to say, no, this is my choice, my decision. I'm keeping this baby.
Does that happen?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Well,
even more often than we would like to happen, but it does. Mm-hmm. So just to empower the women to make healthy choices for their pregnancies, that's the unique role of Lydia in Macedonia. And only takes one woman at a time to change the course of the history.
Well, that is a great note to actually end on. You also are a young woman who is changing history, not just in Macedonia. You know, Svetlana, that I greatly appreciate you and our friendship, and I greatly value what you and Alexandra are currently doing in Macedonia to speak life, to share life in a post-communist country.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So if you had one thing you could say, if I give you one thing you can say to women who are working in centers in non-communist countries, but they have a woman from a communist country, let's say a woman who is 30, 32, whatever, from Macedonia, has been raised her whole life in Macedonia, and she's suddenly, boom, in the center in Columbus, Ohio, in an unexpected pregnancy. What advice can you give to that consultant, that pregnancy consultant sitting across the table or next to that young imaginary woman from Macedonia?
I would just say, you will be an amazing mother. And it's most likely that there is a history of abortions in the family. I would say it's time to break the curse and to give life and to choose life. You know, for us, America is the land of opportunities. It's the promised land. So I would even use that. You have many more available resources there than we have here. And greater support that they may find here.
Yeah. Well, Svetlana, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure and eye-opening to talk with you. For our audience, we were having all sorts of conversations before it started getting recorded that were fascinating as well. But thank you for the insights that you've provided for us. It's been a pleasure to hear from you, and I'm sure that this will be a blessing to women as they have the opportunity to use these things that you've said as they consult with other women who are in unexpected pregnancies. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thanks, Ellen. If any of our listeners have missed our previous episodes with Ellen on the World Perspectives, just scroll back a little bit and find those episodes titled World Perspectives and subscribe so that you don't miss out on any of our future episodes. Let me just take a moment to those who have subscribed or given us a rating or shared an episode with a friend. Thank you. You are helping us spread the word about the work of the pregnancy help movement. You are bringing information to those who may not have known anything about what we've talked about in an episode. So thank you for listening and subscribing and supporting us. And we'll have more coming your way soon.